Welcome to the Ori Spotlight Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Foster. This episode is part two of a conversation we're having with Aaron Vernon, the Chief Manufacturing Officer for Quell Therapeutics. So, Aaron, it'd be great if you don't mind. As you know, I did a podcast with Michael Krajewski recently, who's an expert in the theory of constraints, but not in cell therapy. It'd be great if you, as an expert in both, would be able to help us sort of really contextualize how the theory of constraints applies to today's cell therapy manufacturing challenges, like the current state of affairs
Yeah,
as we look at where we are today.
I'd love to. So the idea of the theory of constraints is it's a bit like scheduling in that you've got a critical path in any schedule. You've got a bottleneck in any process flow. And all the theory of constraints says is that what you need to do is focus on that bottleneck. So if there's a particular unit operation that's throttling your operation, it's got a particular capacity. I don't know, 100 units, and you want the entire line to have a capacity of 200 units. The thing you have to do is fix that one particular unit operation first, and then reassess after that because you might have a new bottleneck. You will always, by definition, have a bottleneck. The question is, are you at the level of capacity you need or not? So in today's cell therapy manufacturing, generally it's those activities that take the longest and that it's really hard or impossible to shorten. So cell expansion is a great example. Usually it's several days of cell expansion and just media exchanges and monitoring and making sure the cells are happy till you get to a
Hmm.
particular dose. On the back end, it's usually QC release testing. And then the other one, depending on your operational setup, will actually be something like your isolator utilization. So isolators, generally, most people if they're using isolators either in a grade B space or in a grade C space, they still have to sterilize them. They've got to do that usually before, then they operate, and then they do it after. So it winds up getting hit multiple times. So
Hmm.
pretty much every facility I've looked at in recent years, isolators, your cell expansion, call it your bioreactor, if you will, whatever that is, and then it winds up being QC testing. So if you can look at those things, figure out ways to shorten them, then you might have other things, that might pop up and wind up being the critical path to get things through. But right now, that's kind of where you're at. Does that make some
Yeah,
sense?
it does. And it relates to two things we discussed. One was the facility layout. So we're seeing more and more people isolating the more upstream open steps that are more manual that need to take place in a B and an isolator maybe or a mix from manufacturing from that sort of expansion step, which can be, in the Eero system could be run in OC or as we talked about earlier, even D,
Yeah.
and really optimizing that part of the process, that throughput of that, because you can have multiple upstream operations serving the bottleneck in that case, multiple Eeros. So we think about not only shortening, as you said, I mean, we're usually able to shorten expansion times by about 25%,
Right.
usually 1 to 2 days, which is beneficial, clearly.
Absolutely.
But also by parallelizing it, and where you can do multiple patients at the same time and keeping high utilization there, you keep that front part of the line, which has much shorter unit operations, fully utilized, and that's how you get, because we're trying to optimize the throughput of the whole system, not just a single step, as you just
Yeah.
articulated. So,
And I think one important thing to remember too, really the theory of constraints, it's kind of part of any lean manufacturing approach, which, as I said, it kind of starts with almost a value stream map.
mhm,
And one of the things that always drives things out is waiting time. So I think that's
mhm,
the other thing that matters in terms of process design and facility design is how can you parallelize things so you don't have to wait. So I think I had mentioned it. So, always best to bring materials in a kitted format so that you can just pull them out and you're not sitting there waiting for materials. Trying to do thing so trying to I think media prep is a great example as
mhm.
well. I've seen a lot of companies who have been smartly said, I'm just going to pull media prep out and I'm going to have a separate suite where we're going to just make solutions, make buffers, make
Yep.
medias, etc. So then there's no waiting, right? In the end, if you're trying for any production line, you want to feed the beast so that it's not sitting there waiting.
That's right.
And I think that's a really important key. It's not that's a specific bottleneck per se, but it's when you kind of total up the wait times that you see in the overall process, those wait times in and of itself will hop up towards the top of the activities that, to me, that's always addressable. The less you wait, the better you are. And even on the back end, you don't really want to have to wait until you're done and dusted with every QC test if you can help it. If your longest thing is a 7-day assay for sterility, well, maybe doing a release for a release for shipping so that you can ship to the site, so the
Hmm.
site can hold on to the materials before they start doing preconditioning while you're waiting on the sterility tests. It doesn't shorten durations, but it does, since you parallel track things a little bit and you've overlapped differently, it does allow you to save ultimate time on your vein to vein time. And in the end, as you said, every day is precious for these patients. And
Yeah,
and so that's just another way to think about it and use those approaches.
absolutely. And a couple things that recently we've been talking to partners about to address some of those needs are, we're able to pre-fill consumables and, media into consumables. They've been
Yep.
validated up to 7 days now. They'll be 14 days, at, mid-year this year. So again, doing that unit operation offline out of the linear, workflow so that they could be always available, feeding the beast, feeding the bottleneck to make sure that's fully utilized.
Yeah.
And we even had a partner say, well, since the Eero is a closed system, couldn't we, in theory at least, start sterility testing early, like during the culture? You have to validate, obviously, there was no contamination introduced post it leaving the Eero system. But, in theory, if it's a closed system, there shouldn't be an opportunity to introduce contaminants. So these are the types of innovations to try and draw forward. As you said, it's that vein to vein time that's the bogey. It's the how long does it take it to get it from from the patient back to the patient, and everything we
Exactly.
can do to shorten that. One other thing that I was unaware of that you're probably waking up in cold sweats about, but is kind of scheduling. I've heard from lots of partners now that the theory is, okay, let's say I have an 8-day process. I start on a Monday, I harvest on a Tuesday or Wednesday the following week, a couple hour changeover time, and I'd like to be back manufacturing again. But the
Mhm.
reality is that the prep to get the patient material there and get the process ready and get everything going, you don't start that same day a few hours later. You end up probably burning a whole nother 2 or 3 or 4 days to get ready for, and so you actually end up starting on the following Monday. So really an 8-day process takes 14 days of capacity, which is kind of
Yeah.
the nightmare, pull your hair out scenario. So like the scheduling and logistics piece can't be overlooked in that, you've got a circular supply chain. We're starting with, patient material that we can't just have sitting around waiting for us to get ready. And that the ability to potentially shorten a process and pull it into a calendar week has outsized benefits because you can say every Monday we start. We have a 6-day process. We start on Monday, we harvest on Saturday. We start on Monday, we harvest on Saturday, and then we can sort of optimize the whole supply chain around that cadence. Otherwise, if sometimes it's Tuesday and sometimes it's Wednesday and sometimes it's Thursday, it becomes much more complicated. I don't know if that's a reality, but that's what I've been
It's
sort of
a
hearing
it's
out there.
a I mean, we could probably spend 3 hours talking about this and how it impacts. And I think that there's a lot of things to it. I think you're absolutely right. What I found is that I think everyone always focuses when they're mapping out their capacity. They look at the days where you're actually doing unit operations and ignoring the days when you're prepping for those unit operations. And those are just as important as the days when you're doing the unit operations, right? You
Yeah,
you can't you can't ignore gassing in an isolator the night before and still be able to run the next day. So I think
right.
that's really important. I think it's also the thing that we always forget is, again, not in a vacuum. Monday starts are great, but if your apheresis is coming in fresh, you're not. No one's going to aphe for you on a Saturday, or very few places are going to aphe for you on a Saturday or a Sunday. So
Good point.
so
Yeah,
I'm actually used to Mondays. We never get to start on Mondays. It's
right.
usually a Tuesday or a Wednesday, and
Hmm.
we do want to optimize for throughput, but also for managing the resources. And I prefer not to have people work on weekends if they
Weekend
don't
work.
have
Yeah,
to.
yeah.
But it is really complicated. Again, it's because it's not fully in your control. If it's a frozen in, it's a lot easier to say, "Hey, cool, it already comes in frozen. I can start on Mondays and
Hmm.
and optimize for that." I think the other thing for us, and I know we talked a little bit about this, is the idea that there's new uses for cell therapies like what we're doing at Quell, that are not, they're not oncology. And so there's a little bit of a difference in terms of, I won't say the need, but the kind of the benefit and where they are in treatment lines.
Yeah.
I can't. I can't always assume that a patient that's planned for an AIF is going to get an AIF. Sometimes they say, "Hey, I'm going to go on holiday for 2 weeks," and I'm not gonna, I've never had a cancer patient say, "I'm taking time off." And then you start saying, "Well, what do I do?" With something like liver transplantation, I do have the luxury to say, "You know what? I'm effectively going to try to plan to have two patients for every slot." And it can be annoying to the second patient, the one who's ready to go, but it doesn't happen.
Mm.
But in the end, it's better because we assure we've got a patient for every slot.
Right.
You can't really do that for cancer patients. You can't say I'm going to overbook and then ask someone else to. So you the scheduling in there is really difficult. I think the other thing to your point is this is why you do have to parallel things, and having a single solitary work stream and everything is in one suite, so to speak, does make it really hard.
Yeah. No,
The
totally.
more you can pull out, the better. We've figured out ways, even within a single work stream, to overlap different batches and figured out a cadence where you could be running multiple batches concurrently, but that takes a lot of process understanding, and then you've got to hit schedules. And as I said, you're dealing with hospitals, you're dealing with patients. It's not always as easy to schedule it up. So the scheduling side of things is absolutely brutal. But in the end, the manufacturers, be it internal or external, that's a capability they need to have because you've got to be patient focused and you got to figure out a way. So, not a big fan of the hey, this is our set schedule, and there's nothing we can do about it. What we say is here's where we want to start, here's what we can do, and here's how we will flex and accommodate. Because in the end, if there's a patient, we want to figure out a way to get to them. Um, as you get to commercial and scaling, you've got to tamp that variability down, and you've got to be a lot more regimented. But on the clinical side, we've got to figure out a way to provide that service, if you will.
Is that the major difference between sort of clinical scale and commercial scale manufacturing as you think about it? Like, what are the major differences? Obviously, there's a volume difference, clearly, or
Yeah,
hopefully,
I
when
hope
you get
so.
to
Yeah,
commercial. Um, what are the major kind of considerations as you think of the differences between clinical and commercial manufacturing?
I think it's that. I mean, look, you want to. It's the same thing. You're going to want to service every patient as best you can. But if you're trying to, I think the impacts are greater. So that one of those facilities that we talked about that I designed that was intended to have up to 5,000 patient batches a year would have had 200 batches concurrently
Wow.
running. And you go, you actually just can't manage the variability in your overall operation if every single one of those you're kind of, hey, I wanted to start on day X at time Y, but I was off by 3 hours here or 8 hours here or whatever. It all piles up, and I think that to me is a really big thing. Um, but also, to be fair, once you get to your commercial operation, you've characterized your process better, you've validated your process better, you've tamped down on a lot of the variabilities. You know what you're going to get, and then you can, and all you're looking to do is to drive. We talked vein to vein time, you're just driving to deliver on time in full for every batch at whatever that agreed upon time is or better.
Mm.
And in the end, um the expectation from the patient and the hospital at a commercial product is you will do that come hell or high water. And so that I think that's what it's more of a, we know what we can do, and so we're just going to do it. The at the clinical scale, it's a lot more of where there's higher variability that we haven't been able to kind of manage out of the process yet or fully characterize. So we have to be a little bit more flexible in what we do. And regardless, they're both service oriented, right? You're trying to make sure that a patient gets whatever they need.
Yeah.
But I think the harder one is if you've got good demand coming in, and you've got one patient who can't do it the way you normally want to do it and needs to be well off that, that's really hard to service, and it can have a knock on effect to the entire operation, and that gets worse with scale, right? I mean,
Mm.
you talk about if you're able to kind of put a bunch of your eros in a room, that's cool and that's great. But if suddenly you've got this knock on effect of things that were supposed to happen sequentially that suddenly are parallel, you can't quite do all of that. You might not
Mm.
be resourced to do it. You might have quality issues or line clearance issues if you're trying to do that. And I think that's one of the keys with the increased complexity when you get to that scale.
Yeah. Yeah. Any variability to the upside needs to be allowed for in some way to
Yeah, I
further
mean, they are
constrain
still
persistence.
cells, and they still, I got, years and years of making mabs. In the end, cells are going to grow at the speed they wanted it to grow at, and even commercial processes, I know they still have a variability of a day or two in cell expansion, and you've got
Hmm.
to be able to plan for that.
Yeah.
Which is difficult, not impossible. People know how to do it, but it just means you wind up having to have a little bit more capacity available, and you're not quite running in high 80s or 90 of capacity utilization because it's just not possible.
Yeah. I mean, you talked about the challenges of trying to run multiple batches through the same space at the same time. Is it even possible to do at commercial scale on paper? I mean, it feels to me like digital is an absolute requirement here to be able to demonstrate to the regulator that you're in a zero defect kind of environment.
I think what I would say is it possible? Yes. Is it desirable or is it a good idea? No. And I think you're carrying way too much of a risk at that point. Um, it'll break pretty early on. I would say it's a question of kind of how many. I know that sounds like an odd thing to say, but absolutely when you look at, I was at a conference once and someone was talking about kind of what that scaling looks like when you start talking about pieces of paper. If you've got several hundred pieces of paper, actually, I'll even ignore the paper side of it. It's the data. It's You're not getting your data out fast enough. And I know there's tools and approaches to be able to scan your paper and
Yeah.
get out stuff, but really, you kind of need to know what's going on more in real time. But just the review, the quality review both from the production team or QC team back to the QA team to check every piece of paper versus some electronic system where you're doing a release by exception kind of thing. What you'll see is just a huge once you get past a couple dozen kind of batches, um, the the business case for having a proper MES, some kind of system like that, is so high. And obviously, as I said, I think I mentioned it before, but for us right now, the most important thing is data acquisition. We need to learn about our process,
Mhm.
and though we still are on paper, and there are some reasons for it, we do have tools to be able to extract all those data and get it into systems so we can analyze it. And the further we go along, more we're going to be pushing towards getting that data first and foremost, directly into systems. Um, but and be ready for what you'll need for scaling. But yeah, I think it'd be insanity to if you're trying to do. I think I'd always kind of pegged it at if you could probably do 100 over the course of a year. It won't be fun, but it'll be great. If you're starting to do 200, 300, sorry,
Yeah.
you're just
Not
gonna be
happening.
you're gonna be buried, and it's not gonna work, and you're gonna screw things up. Um, so what I would always say is those are tools. If you're not going to have them in place for your PPQ and for your and the like, you better make sure they're done before that BLA is in because it's going to be miserable afterwards if you don't do that. And I also think at that point you've qualified your process. It's a lot easier to put some of those tools in place. There's fewer changes. I have seen people who have gone digital very early, and it was a little bit more to their detriment because of the amount of effort they had to put into changing systems.
Hmm.
Um, but again, it's all going to depend on your where you are. For us, we're still early in the life cycle of our manufacturing process. Give it a couple more years, and it's locked down a little bit more. We want to digitize the heck out of it so that
Yeah.
we have every bit of data at every minute of every day because that's going to be absolutely critical. And I think we talked before. I think that's one of the things where some of the technology developers haven't really thought that way. It's the box is easier in some respects, and it's easy to focus on that. But there's data generated in that box, and you've got
Yeah.
to get that somewhere,
Connectivity is
and it's
critical.
got to be
Yeah.
useful. So I think that's pretty critical.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Absolutely.
ultimately, that's where you want to be. Where I love to be is that we've got all of our data coming into a single place where it's contextualized and right, it's useful. People are analyzing it, we can act on it and do stuff. I'm never a big fan of and I've had people try to sell me things in the past and say, hey, I'll let you know sooner than other people know about a particular issue, be it a risk management or business continuity thing or whatever. But if it's 5 minutes ahead of time and I can't do anything, that's not useful data. 6 days ahead of time, right? 5 days, that's actionable data, and that's what I want. I don't like. I understand why we have to and others have to at times go with those approaches, but getting some kind of PAT in there to know what's going on is really hypercritical.
Yeah.
Especially as you scale. Again, I go back to any little issue is going to get in the way and have a major knock-on effect. And really, at scaling in autologous cell therapies, the issue is it's that whole everyone talks. It's the scaling out, not up. So every little bit of variability kind of cascades out, and so the sooner you know what's going on, the better you can be. And especially if you don't have to gown someone up and get them in there, and you can see remotely what's going on, it's faster and easier
From
for you to
London
do
if
that.
you're in California, or from
Right.
your bedroom if it's 3 in the morning and something alarms. These
Exactly.
are helpful features to have. I mean, another example of if you have a digital native platform, you are capturing data that can be turned into information for our partners. We built, just like robots aren't going to come save us, the AI is not going to come save us
No.
either. But there are tools, analytical tools, that if you have data, you can drive algorithms off of. We have a machine learning algorithm that predicts cell count. So you're going to take a sample every day, or maybe sometimes twice a day early in the process, because you need to know what's happening in there. You're going to take a sample, you might do a cell count, you might do flow, you might do other things. But if I can tell you with a reasonable amount of certainty that there's, plus or minus 5% how many cells are in there, maybe that saves you a sample one day, and or maybe it just helps you prepare for, well, I know I'm going to finish on day 6 instead of day 7, so I can get my harvest resources ready, I can be ready preparing my next batch. I'm all, this kind of information and insight is valuable. Now, it's not going to change the world, but it's incrementally valuable on top of what we're doing today, which is, as you know, highly manual and very person driven.
Yeah, no, it's great, and you're right. AI won't save in this case, AI is not going to save the world, but machine learning and kind of better tools to contextualize, to analyze their data, and to find correlations that might not exist, or that might not be easily found manually. I'll say,
Hmm.
and better model the system, right? About what's really going on. If you could tell me after day zero what my batch
Your
scale was
harvest
going to
day,
be,
your
like
harvest day is going to be, yeah,
that'd be great.
yeah,
That'd be tremendous if that's that model winds up being useful to be able to go back to our customers and say, this is what we think it's going to be. Hey, we're worried about this batch because I think our cell counts may be low. Is there anything that we can do again to intervene? Or just go, hey, this might fall into the really high risk category. Do you even want to continue with this batch? Do we think, um, or let's give it a couple days, see how it goes, and then say, do you need to pull the plug and go back and start over because it's just highly unlikely to be successful.
yeah, yeah,
But if you don't have a kind of digital base, you're playing with spreadsheets and at best,
yeah.
and
You're
it's
flying
it's a,
blind for sure.
exactly.
I mean, to that example, it's if you give your customer 5 minutes notice, it doesn't do them any good. If you do 5 days notice, they might be able to do something
It
different. So,
matters. It
yeah,
that matters. 5 days matters. Absolutely, it
yeah.
does.
Since we're already doing a little bit of crystal ball gazing, I'll ask you to look a bit deeper into, what does success look like for the industry from your perspective in the 5 to 10 year time frame. I mean, I've only been in the industry for 5 years. It seems as though many of the issues we were talking about 5 years ago we're still talking about. But what's your sense of what good looks like in the next 5 to 10 year window for cell therapy manufacturing, kind of broadly some of the topics we've discussed?
Yeah, I mean, I think continuing on that kind of technology maturity journey that we're on.
Mm,
But I also think some of this is, and it sounds corny. I think we got to work together a little bit better on this to lift up the entire industry. There's a lot of, again, I think there's still some siloed thinking in different places where, as I said, I think we talked earlier that people may be trying to innovate in a particular area, and that's great. there are market forces why they want to do that, but it might not be driving the overall thing. I do think we need to. You and I have talked. I said I joked yet before about I'll hang up my spurs when we get to a million patients a year. The
Hmm.
reason I like talking about a million a year is it's completely different conversations.
Yeah,
There's no way
it's a
we can
thousand
take the
X.
industry today
Yeah.
and get to a million right
Hmm.
there. So what I want for me success looks like, let's get better roadmap of how we're going to get there and start to see movement towards that. Because if we've already cleared the 10,000 in 2024, we should have been around 10,000 patients.
Fingers crossed. Yeah,
Now's
waiting for the number.
now's the
Yeah.
time that we should be thinking about, okay, cool, what's the process, the major process reengineering that we need? I think that's one. I think two, it's as I said, and we're seeing it a lot more, is that focus on transitioning it from an immature science to more of a mature technology that you've got focus on lean manufacturing, trying to do this better, cheaper, faster, looking end to end on how to do that, and then it's going to sound weird. I'd love to see people take some risks, um, and not just go with a technology that's quote unquote proven, even though none of the technologies that are quote unquote proven really have that long of a kind of record, so to
Hmm.
speak. But I think those are the things that I'm really looking for. But as I said, I think for us to be successful manufacturing in the next decade, we have to impact things across the value chain. We've got to change. We got to get apheresis out of hospitals. I don't see that as a long-term viable thing. I don't
Mm.
think it's viable for hospitals. I think, in the States, you don't really do much radiology in the hospitals anymore.
No.
It's high capex. The only way you get profitable is you've got high capacity utilization. You pull those out, you put them near hospitals, and you can fill them up. I think that's how we should do apheresis. I think that's scalable. I think that then gives you a platform for potentially going and doing more distributed manufacturing. I
Yeah.
am absolutely unconvinced that point of care works on a commercial scale. It might be useful for some clinical work, etc. But again, I'm worried about getting to as many hospitals as possible. You're not going to go put point of care equipment in a community hospital. They're not going to. It's just not going to happen, right?
Mm.
So move the technology along. Focus on analytical, in addition to some better cell expansion stuff. Focus on the end to end. And I'd like us to show that we've got a capability across the industry that can show that we can get to 50, show that we can get to 100, show a plan to get to a million.
Hmm.
Because otherwise, we're not going to get the continued investment necessary to get this to a point of profitability. And we know the science is great. We know we can make great medicines, and we know they're life changing. But the last 5 years, the last couple of years in particular, there's been a bunch of good products that just because of the economic situation haven't been able to get to patients, and that's heartbreaking to me. So I think that's the other thing I'd say is success looks like more actual product to patients, not just over the line with regulators, but seeing that actual uptake of use of those products. And if that's because they've better defined that TPP up front, and that's better aligned, and we get better products to market, or just bringing down some of those barriers that we've talked about before. Um, I don't want to talk about cell therapy as a new thing in 10 years. I want to talk about it. It's kind of a standard tool in the toolkit that physicians can use to treat diseases that are really difficult to treat.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that last point, especially. I agree. I mean, I think I've said this probably unpopularly, publicly, and from stage a couple of times about, we celebrate the milestones. The first patient dosed, we sent out a press release. Approval, we sent out a press release. We're excited, and those are milestones for any company. But ultimately, the measuring stick that matters: how many patients are treated. You
That's
can have the
it,
best patients,
it's
the
the
best
only thing that
product ever.
matters.
If you're treating 10 patients, great for those 10 patients, but it's not having the impact that any of us want. That's the real measuring stick: is how many patients are being successfully treated with a therapy. That's what's meaningful for the patient
Well, we
population, but
want
also financially for the company.
yeah, we want a long list of diseases that today patients who are diagnosed with it feel like they have very few options. That in a decade they feel like um, there's options for them, and it's not a death sentence. if they get that diagnosis. That's what you want.
Absolutely.
You want better quality of life. You want longer life, and you want options because there's nothing worse. There's nothing worse than having a diagnosis where there's no treatment for it. And cell and gene therapy, in many cases, could be the approach for that. We've got to find a way to make it work. It's got to be affordable, it's got to be logistically possible, and it's got to be life changing. And so that's kind of where I want us to focus.
I think
Um,
that's a great ambition. You may not be aware of this. Peter Marks is a big fan of the Ori podcast. Actually, he probably has never heard of Ori or the podcast, but um, I would put a shout out to Peter and his team and the regulator to say one thing we could use from them in the kind of near-ish term is some clearer guidance on comparability. Because right now, what we're looking at, if we want to make a change in our manufacturing process, we are, from the time we file and get approval, for 20 years, trying to adapt, to improve is incredibly difficult. And we're locking processes and companies into technologies that are decades old without any clear way of how do we adopt newer, potentially better technologies. And I think, this perceived barrier of like, I think I had heard it took Kite 2 years to shave those 2 days off their manufacturing process to go from
yeah,
16 to 14. And I think that some clarity on that, on what good looks like from what do we really need to prove to show that our process is comparable, and to do process improvement along the way, could be super useful in trying to help improve some of these issues. So we're not dealing with legacy challenges that we've been dealing for the last 10 years, for the next 10 years.
it's better now, and I'll get shout out to the FDA. We got guidance on comparability last
Yes.
year, right? And I know some people would say like, well, all I got was, hey, you got to prospectively plan out what comparability looks like,
Right.
and so maybe there's more to do, and I think
Yeah.
that there still is, but
Practically, I think, yeah.
I still think we're far better off than we were 5 years ago in terms of
Yeah.
understanding that
Yeah.
and clarity from regulators. I mean, all they're trying to say is understand your critical to quality attributes, right?
Yep.
And tell me ahead of time what you're going to do, and don't do a little bit more than just, well, I'm going to hand wave and say, yeah, I don't think it's affecting anything, so everything's fine. But I think but what true comparability means is a critical one, and it actually goes down to validation impact as well on equipment. But if I've had people say to me, well, if I'm going from one, I'll say, if I'm going from one eero to another eero, I have to show that's comparable. I'm like, no, no, I don't. I shouldn't have to show that that's a quote unquote comparable process
Mm-hmm.
because it's the same equipment and I'm just running on another piece of kit. And that's not a new idea. The idea that if I have lots of the same thing, that I don't go and validate them all to
Against
the
each other.
same
Yeah.
extent,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's an important thing. But I keep going back to when you start talking about, again, I don't like point of care, so I'll ignore that. But at least decentralized or
Mm-hmm.
distributed manufacturing, where we've got more smaller facilities running equipment. If you don't get comparability right, right, and we're not clear about what that really means, if I'm doing the exact same thing inside of a box here in Maryland, or doing it in London, or doing it out in California, or doing it in the middle of America, or in Southeast Asia, if we're not clear about what that really means, people are just still never going to be able to pull it off. But if you can get some clarity there, on how that works, again, that's not even a process change, right? That's same process, different location, so to speak. That'll help a lot, because then it opens up to when you do make a change, right? I make a change in one place, and there's work I need to do at other places, but I don't need to replicate every bit of thing. And
Yeah.
you can't compare every batch and every location to every other batch and every other location. And I think that that's clear. But we're in a better spot than we were when I first started in the industry almost 9 years ago.
Yep.
And but there's still work there's clearly work to be done. But I think developers need to understand, and I'd say technology developers like yourselves need to be able to say, hey, this is what we understand about the stuff that's being made, and this is the data. Going back to that data conversation,
Mm-hmm.
these are the data that we can collect. These are the data that we can help you show the regulators to show this is what makes a comparable product. So you're not they can feel comfortable they're not changing it, and then you show that your platform is consistent wherever it is in the world. That's more than half the battle, and it's a lot harder to do when there's manual steps and differences in differences from on how we do things in place to place.
Yeah,
So I think we've got an opportunity there to make some real headway, and if we don't,
absolutely.
it won't scale.
Yeah, we did have an opportunity to meet with the FDA, do a Type D meeting with Jason Bach and his team down at CTMC. We tech transferred to a second site. We ran the parallel process and demonstrated what we would call comparability. It wasn't to the kind of regulatory standard, but essentially we ran six
Right.
batches, three in each place. All six met their CQAs at the measured at the same lab using their clinical analytical tool set, clinical assays. So
Yeah.
we can say, okay, yeah, the Euro performed similarly in both places, and that's the kind of data sets that we need to continue to build on to
Exactly.
enable things like distributed manufacturing and rapid tech transfer. To be able
That,
to
to
expand
me,
batches.
it's the rapid tech transfer thing to me is really key because
Yeah.
again, I think I've mentioned that, if you've got, in the end, you just want to have your manufacturing as close to the people as possibly can have. I don't
Hmm.
really want to ship material from the UK to the US and back.
Hmm.
But if the effort to go to a second location is so high, um, you suck it up and you deal with logistics issues. And so the lower you can get that bar, show we've got repeatability, show we've got comparability, it's easier to do that. And so now I can have more smaller facilities, so to speak, and scale a little bit easier. And I think
Yeah.
that's where I'd like to be able to get to in life, not 10,000 products through a facility at a time kind of planning. I'd rather at whatever that right kind of scale is and then distribute it from there. And just kind of, the McDonald's approach of here's your binder, let's go duplicate it somewhere else. And we know we're going to run it the exact same way and patients will get the same product from any place.
Yeah. Exactly. I guess my complaint, my whinge, which may be unfair, is maybe it's not comparability. Maybe it's as we improve the process, we make it better. How much better is not the same. How much better requires a new clinical trial. It's
Yeah,
that
that
it's
is
that distinction that, as we process improvement happens over time, as it should. Is comparability the right bar? Should we be seeking comparability, or should we be seeking process improvement?
I think the
And
question about what from comparability is to what's a new product, right?
yeah, yeah.
Having companies having gone through, I think we talked kind of, hey, Novartis developing T-Charge,
Hmm.
that's a new product to them, but is it really? There's a standard which you could argue it isn't, and I think getting clarity about that of the, hey, if I give fewer cells that are healthier to a patient and it's got the same CAR, right? It's the same vector, it's treated the same way. Is that the same product of me giving more cells that maybe aren't quite as healthy? And so there's less in vivo expansion, there's more ex vivo expansion. I don't know where that line is. And I've been in meetings at companies where we debated that, and there's no clarity there. And I think what happens is anytime you get close to that conversation in a meeting, someone raises their hand and goes, "I'm really scared here that we
Right.
just made a new
I don't really
product.
want to go there.
Can
Yeah.
we just back way away from that?" And it'd be
Yeah.
good if we understood where. I understand there may be some gray, but if you could narrow that gray zone to be smaller, I think we'd be better off. And again, you might wind up help driving the innovation you really want to get to help, because we talked about that theory of constraints. The best way to increase capacity through facility is to greatly shorten the manufacturing time. If you've got a 7-day expansion and you can get that done in 2, man, that's amazing.
Hmm.
Um, but can I do that without
But
a
is
whole
that the
new
same
BLA?
process? Is it
Yeah,
comparable?
I think that's the area I'd like us to progress a little bit
Yes.
in
Uh,
in the near
I characterized
term.
my complaint wrong, but I think that's the real nub of it: is how much improvement leads to a different product, leads to a whole cascade of unintended consequences versus,
Exactly.
or just making the existing product and process better.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, to finish up, thank you so much for your time
You're welcome.
and for spending it with us. I wanted to just ask you to finish on a high note about what gets you most excited about what's coming down the pike in cell therapy manufacturing, or cell therapy in general, or the field, advanced therapies, what you're doing at Quell. Let's leave on a high note about what gets Aaron Vernon excited in the short to medium term.
Yeah, what excites me is the ability to impact patients' lives. I mean, that's real simple.
Hmm.
And where we're getting to and being able to use these new modalities in different areas. I spent a lot of time working on hemonc, working on solid tumors, and now working in the I&I space with Quell and our CAR Tregs. And I'm really excited about being able to use this technology to affect patients' lives. And my wife is a pediatric geneticist. Her expertise is in rare disease, and since there's been a change driven by cell and gene therapy of actually being able to treat some of the diseases for some of her patients that didn't have treatments before. So that one really in particular gets me going too. But Quell specifically, 2025 is going to be an amazing year, right? We've got the opportunity to get to a proof of concept for engineered CAR Tregs that people have been waiting for, ourselves included.
Hmm.
And as I said, like CAR T's got that in 2011. I remember I saw those early data from Penn,
Hmm.
and it was amazing. And I want people to be, and I think there's a bunch of people sitting around going, man, if you could do that with T-Regs, you could change the world. And there's a bunch of things out there. And so what I'm really excited about is that ability to deliver on what we need to do, have our team do what we need to do to help generate those data, prove that this new modality will work, and then see people run to it and realize that we can continue to invest in it, and look across different disease states and where else we can drive and make life changing impact for people. uh, Obviously our intention is to stay at the forefront of that, and feel that we've got the manufacturing capability and the technical expertise to do that. But really, I just to be there at that point to show that you've got a proof of concept and know that that it can affect people's lives. That's really exciting.
Yeah,
And as I
very
said,
exciting.
that's the reason I get up every day and come to work, and I want to make people's lives better. Um, and I think we've got some really cool science, Quell and his energy as a whole, to help. And I just don't want the operational complexities to get in the way. And
No,
and
I think
that's
it's a.
that's kind of where I'm at.
I agree 100%. I think I was sat on a panel not that long ago, and I was actually sitting next to Pascal Touchon, as you know, is the head of Atara.
Yeah,
And I was asked, how long, what do you think? And I said, I think widespread availability and multiple products being available from allo, I think is still 10 years away. And I think in vivo is probably 20 years away. And if you just think about how long these things take, you just referenced 2011 when we first started getting CAR T data.
yeah,
We're still right now at a point where we're starting to break through, and it's starting, it's going to take a
can
while.
take a while.
So my advice, and it sounds like you're aligned with this, is let's fix what we got now. What we know works. Let's fix what we've got. And let's ride this as long as we need to until the next thing happens. But
And the
let's not
next
wait
thing,
for the next thing. We have to. There are patients now today who need us. They need these life saving therapies. So let's do what's necessary to make sure they get them.
exactly. That's exactly where I'm at.
Thank you, sir. Great to see you. I really
Great to
appreciate
see
your
you too.
time, and
You're very welcome. This is
hope
great.
to bump into you at one of the many conferences we'll probably be at this year.
I'll let you know when I'm in London. It happens a lot. We'll get together.
All right, I owe you a warm flat beer at some point.
Sounds brilliant. Thanks, Jason. Good to chat.